Here we go. Starting over again. Teitzei, chapter 21 of Deuteronomy. Devarim, verse 10 starts off with laws of land warfare. Uh, they go through and give some. I feel like that to postmodern warfare, it's a little odd, and that is the whole idea of how to treat someone that you bring back as a captive from war. And I would think that Western militaries, and to include Israel, have the same comparable ethics of warfare that are sort of developed out of the Torah itself. And I find it quite interesting. I've studied it. I know it, and I know it primarily because I was in war, and I know how they go through the whole litany of things that how you have to conduct yourself. Like in warfare, you can only use certain kinds of rounds. I know that sounds crazy. Like, today we have these very special bullets in our weapons that fragment and explode and all that stuff. Well, that's against the laws of land warfare. Now, you can send a missile to kill a terrorist, but you can't use a pistol with a bullet that fragments into the human body that way. So oddities of modern day human warfare, but there was ethical treatment of human beings, very important. The idea of caring for the vulnerable. All throughout the Parshah, there are multiple commandments emphasizing to caring for the widow and the orphans and people that were sick or ill, etc., and also to take care of strangers. I find it interesting that the concept of taking care of the person who's not of you, is not a Jew, who is a stranger that comes into your midst, how to treat them. It really underscores the moral obligation to provide for the well-being of people that are around you. Next is marriage and divorce is discussed. The whole idea of the rules for the husband, his responsibility to his wife, and the guidelines for divorce. He has to provide her with a get or contract that outlines exactly how he's going to take care of her and his obligations to her if he doesn't, is not able to take care of her, if he dies, etc. Then there are what I like to call favorable law practices or practices of labor law, and that is the Parshah relates to paying wages promptly after a contract is paid. Like, don't delay paying your workers. Now, I think that this has something to do with, when you work, you get paid on that particular day. And obviously in our world that we live in, we get paid once or twice a month and not necessarily daily. But the whole idea is to follow up with your payment. I mentioned honesty in business. A Parshah prohibits the use of dishonest weights and measures. I find it mildly amusing that one nation, well, Tyre and Sidon, I don't know if you remember them, but they were destroyed, and they were not part of the Jewish nation. They were part of their own people. And they were the head importer exporters. Like, as a matter of fact, everything that come from Europe down to Asia and Africa, it had to come through that port right close to between Israel and Lebanon. And what they would do is you had to bring in your items, you had to sell them to Tyre and Sidon, and then they would give you the money that it's worth. Then they would take and resell it at a higher profit. And they often paid for that property by the importer at a very cheap rate because, hey, they could do it because they were the only exporters around. They were judged by that and destroyed. And then you have the whole idea of, which will revisit the principles of warfare again. The Parshah outlines guidelines on how Israel should conduct warfare, to include the prohibition against destroying fruit-bearing trees, sieges that would create starvation, and also the treatment of the captives, in which we started off at the beginning with. There is sexual ethics. The Parshah addresses various laws related to sexual ethics, including the prohibition of incestuous relationships with animals, and also other sexual immorality, such as homosexuality. We have obviously kindness to animals, not to muzzle the ox. I used to remind my mom that when I'd be in the garden picking cucumbers, and she's like, "Don't eat all the cucumbers," because I'd pick the small ones and eat them while I was picking them. Like, don't eat all the cucumbers, and I'd say, "You can't muzzle an ox, Mom." So it's just a reminder. Obviously, we also have this whole thing of remembering Amalek and to blot out his memory. I find it difficult that the Jewish people could ever blot his memory out, because we're always talking about why we need to blot it out. So that could be an entertaining discussion. And then last but not the least is the idea of ritual purity and holiness, the idea of separation, the idea of taking waste and bringing it outside of the camp. When someone has a disease that could be sent and given to other people, they go outside of the camp to go through the incubation period or whatever. So it's more than that. It's also about our personal level of holiness and an increased sense of responsibility to Hashem. I was talking to another friend and I guess some way a co-writer with Rabbi Chlorfine, and she was saying that one of the things that really impressed her was his heightened sense of spirituality that came from his long journey back to Judaism. And he was raised secular. He was Jewish by birth, but secular. And throughout the course of history, went from a CBS ad writer to a writer for shows and bits. He worked with Mel Blanc, who was the great voice of all the cartoons that we heard when we were children, and was on the verge of just being super big, was making really good money, and walked away from it all to go drop out in the 70s and to drop acid and take drugs and try to find himself. Well, eventually, in a number of years, he found himself. And of course, he lived in Tzfat. He worked for the Rebbe at Chabad. He's written for rabbis at Chabad, ghost written. I mean, this guy is a prolific writer, but his connection to God was something that I admired and I wanted to emulate. That was something I liked about that. And those are things that come and are birthed straight out of the Torah. That's what made me excited about the Torah. I didn't come out of Torah, out of Christianity, to think that every Jewish person was going to be like a saint walking around with a halo. I didn't think that every Jewish person was going to be so nice and kind that they would just give me the world. I mean, come on. I came because Torah was so beautiful and true and real and life-changing and illuminating, that within itself there are mysteries in the text that, even though we don't understand, that when we read them and meditate on them, they do something to our DNA. They change us. It's a real spiritual, and I would even take it another step. Torah, the study of Torah, the embodiment of Torah, is actually the very sustainer that God has put in physicality. And that if we want to connect to the master of the universe at the highest level, we're going to have to embody that. But it's not just about memorizing and knowing the books. It's about living to the highest standard that the book requires. And when I mean standard, I'm talking about ethics and the treatment of other people and kindness. So many people still get a hold of me that want to convert, and God bless them, some of them do. As a matter of fact, I just heard of another person converting this week that was a part of our class a number of years ago. And I'm like, I'm so happy for them. But at the same time, I'm happy that we found the same Torah that they found. And I'm happy that we can study the same way a convert or a regular Jewish person can study. and still find ourselves highly elevated. So that concludes my sort of overview of the portion. Let's get into the discussion of this. Oh, Cheyenne, you have a little, that's cute. I have to figure out how to do that. She left a little heart up or something up on the screen. So let's open the floor up.